there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today is part 3 of our Magic Origins set review. We'll be looking at all the black cards in the set, and if you missed the first 2 installments, check out those on the channel. We looked at the white cards, and then yesterday all the blue cards. Tomorrow we'll look at all the red cards, and then the next day the green, and on the last day, Wednesday, we'll see the rest of the set. So hopefully we'll get you prepared for the pre-release this coming weekend. Just want to take a second to say thank you to all the new subscribers. We had a lot of folks join us over the last few weeks while we've been doing Magic Origins spoilers as well as the set review. So thanks for joining the channel. It certainly does mean a lot to us. And having said that, let's jump into the cards. And the first one is Blightcaster. And there's really one use for this in Limited, and it's if you're playing an Enchantment Matters theme. That's probably a white-black deck, although Enchantment Matters does seem to go through all the colors, does seem to be a little stronger in white. If you're not playing that theme in Limited, you don't really want to touch this guy. He's going to cost 4 for a 2/3. That's just not good enough. As far as Standard goes, Mono Black Devotion could make a comeback with some of the cards that we're seeing in the set that really cater to enchantments. If that's the case, this card could see some Standard play, at least for a limited time until the Theros block rotates out. Next is Catacomb Slug, and this is just simply here for a controlling strategy in Limited. This is not a great creature, it's not going to do great things for you, but it does gum up the ground, and if you need that in your deck, maybe you're playing a blue-black control Limited deck, this can be okay just in that deck. In most cases, you're probably going to pass, though. Next is Consecrated by Blood. This is pricey. I don't like the fact that it's 2 black, 2 colorless. You just feel like you're paying a lot for it. But there probably is a niche role for this card in Limited. It's okay in an Enchantment Matter strategy, and it's probably going to be maybe a little better than okay in a Mill Yourself strategy. So blue-black has this mill yourself sort of strategy going on to get creatures and cards in your graveyard. And if you have enough creatures in your graveyard, now all of a sudden you can't really be 2 for 1 when you play this card, and it is a pretty powerful effect, giving your creature a nice little bump and flying. So that deck may want a copy of this, but other than that, you probably want to steer clear. Next is Cruel Revival, and this is black removal. It's a little conditional, but you know what? You can splash it. That's pretty awesome. It's going to be a little annoying when you want to get rid of a zombie, but for the most part, this is just going to be flat out removal for you, and so you get a little bonus if you happen to have a zombie in your graveyard. Dark Dabbling, and I like these effects. These are nice to have at least a 1 of, maybe a 2 of in your Limited deck. It's just a nice little surprise. You can regenerate a creature and this cantrips, which is pretty cool. And if you have Spell Mastery, it can really protect your entire squad, which does allow you to maybe get some early damage in or just make some real tricky blocks that are not profitable for your opponent. So I do like this card. I also like, on a side note, that they actually have reminder text on how regeneration works. I think this is the first time I ever saw that, if I'm not mistaken. And that's pretty good, because I played against a lot of players, even in tournaments, that don't know how regeneration works. And in fact, I remember in a Pro Tour qualifier, I won a match just because my opponent didn't realize that regeneration taps the creature, and I was able to get across for lethal. Dark Petition. So here's your fixed demonic tutor, if you will, and this is a pretty powerful effect. Now, it's interesting because in Standard, decks are going to basically have the choice to use this or Sidisi now to get this type of effect, or both, I guess. But I think this one's a little stronger. At the 5 mana spot, this is pretty nice to be able to search up any card in your library, and then if you happen to have Spell Mastery, you get the 3 mana back. That's not always going to be relevant. That probably looks a little nicer than it really is. You don't always need to Dark Ritual, but you are getting an additional card. You're picking that card, so maybe you're picking something with a 3 casting cost or something you can cast with the rest of your land. So this card, I think, is going to be pretty strong. Obviously, I would play it in Limited. It's going to help you search out your win conditions and your bombs. I definitely think you're going to see this in Standard, perhaps even Modern. It's possible that it's strong enough to cross over into Modern. Definitely tutors are always good in Commander, so this will be a card I think we'll all be very familiar with over the next few months. Deadbridge Shaymin. So there's definitely an elf theme here, and I don't know, the elf theme seems pretty pushed. There could potentially be a Standard elf deck at some point, maybe not right when the set comes out, but if we get a little bit of added elves to Standard over the next couple blocks, it could be a thing. And this one is very powerful, and I like the fact that it costs 3 for a 3/1, and when it dies, your opponent has to discard a card, which they have to really make a decision. Do they want to lose that card? Do they want to take 3 damage? In most cases, they'll probably lose the card, or at least maybe hold on to an extra land so they can deal with it. So it's not going to be quite as strong as maybe it looks, but it's still going to be decent. Demonic Pack, and this one's a mythic. This is a very interesting design, and it costs 4. It's 2 on color, but basically once you play it, on your upkeep, you have to choose one of the 4 items on the card, and you can't choose one twice. So basically, after you play this, you have 4 turns, and then you're going to lose the game on the 4th turn. So you're really setting yourself up to get some advantage out of this card, but then you really have to capitalize on it. In some ways, it almost feels like maybe a fixed version of Doomsday, or how Doomsday was really supposed to play when it's not taken advantage of and kind of being broken in formats like Vintage. So first off, well, how do you kind of trick this card? I mean, you can always bounce this back to your hand after you've played a couple of the bullet points, but the only thing you got to worry about there is if your opponent has any disruption to stop that, you could just plain lose the game. Secondly, the thing that's weird about this card to me is I just don't feel like the bullet points are just very powerful. Like the first one is removal. That's decent, but it's not unconditional removal. I'd feel like if it said destroy target creature, or target creature gets -15/-15 or something like that, that would be a lot better. And then the second one, target opponent discards 2 cards. Okay, so you mind rot them. That's okay, but I almost feel like for the danger involved in this card, this should be more of a Hymn to Turok effect. I feel like they should have been more random cards. Drawing 2 cards, well, that's good, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to win you the game. So, I mean, unless you really felt confident with a little bit of a combat trick, maybe got a lot of bounce and you're going to be able to play with this card, I don't know. It just doesn't seem that great to me. Now, having said that, I really enjoy the design here. I hope we see more cards like this in the future. I love the fact that it kind of goes along with Liliana's story, and at the same time, it's just very unique, and it's a very unique way to kind of put a countdown clock on you or on the game. So hopefully we'll see more like this, and maybe they'll hit with a little stronger in the future. Despoiler of Souls, and this is a aggro card. It's a decent aggro card. It's not the best. It's 2 black, so you want to be really, really heavy black, because this card is much better if you can play it early in the game. So you get a 3/1, that's good. Now it can't block, which that's fine. A 3/1, you want to get in there for damage, but it doesn't have evasion, and to get it back from your graveyard, you do have to exile 2 other creature cards. So this gets a lot better in that mill strategy where you mill yourself. So if I'm playing an aggro/mill myself strategy, I guess this is a good card, but I don't know if that's going to be a super viable strategy. Maybe it is, I don't know, but it feels like you'd have to be playing something like blue, black, red for that to really work, and I don't really think Magic Origins sets itself up for a 3-color limited deck, and very often unless you're just splashing lightly. So I don't know. This is probably not the best aggro card in the set, but you know, if you have an aggro deck, it's going to be fine for you. Erebos' Titan, and first off with this guy, he costs 4 for a 5/5, so that's awesome, like fantastic. Now his abilities to me seem a little suspect. I mean, the first one is nice, but it's very inconsistent, and you don't really have a way to control that very often. And the second one, kind of getting him back. Now he goes back to your hand. If he went back to the battlefield, I would say, wow, this does feel mythic to me. That's a lot better. But you kind of have to jump through hoops or wait for the just right moment to get him back in your hand, and then you still got to cast him. On top of that, his 4 casting cost is 3 black, which makes him very hard to cast in limited unless you're playing minimally a 50% black deck, but you probably want to be even a little stronger black than that if you're playing this guy. Now, if you get him out and you get a 5/5 for turn 4, he's going to be awesome. He's going to do some work for you. He's going to be a limited bomb. So I think he's worth the risk as long as you have enough black mana in your deck to run him, that you're just going to run him. Now, as far as standard goes, here's another card that could be okay in like mono black devotion for the next couple months until that rotates out. So who knows if that deck kind of makes another lunge at popularity. This card could be a part of that. Obliteration Assassin. Here's another elf card, and you get a 2/2 for 3, which isn't super exciting. But when it enters the battlefield, the creature gets -1/-1. Now, it can only be a creature that an opponent controls, so you can't get any other kind of awkward shenanigans with your creatures. Is that good enough? I don't know if that's really spectacular. It just depends on the format. -1/-1 effects are great in some formats, and they're just not good enough in other formats. I think in this one, it will be fine in limited, but other than that, I don't know if you'll see this guy show up, even if there is a elf standard deck. Obliteration Massacre, and here's another kind of elf support card, and this kind of feels like it should have been elf tribal, but I know they don't really do that anymore. 2 black, 2 colorless, and it can be at least a board sweep for many non-elf creatures, so just a nice card to have in your elf deck, maybe at least as a sideboard card more than anything, to deal with a more aggressive deck that's going to have a lot of smaller creatures that will be fast and go up against you in limited. Next is Fetid Imp, and this guy's a 1/2 flyer for 2, so he does have evasion, which is nice, and you can pay to give him Death Touch, which is even nicer. Now, you do have to pay the black to do it, so you kind of are hanging on to that mana, which is a tad annoying early game, but this will still be a good card for you. It's pretty much quasi-removal. Fleshbag Marauder, and this is a very powerful card. This is a reprint. It was powerful in the past, so in limited, first off, yeah, you get a 3/1 for 3, and you and your opponent both have to Chainer's Edict. Pretty strong, and you can sack him if you need to, if he is your weakest creature. And this is good enough to definitely see some standard play in the right deck. This is just a very good removal card. It's cheap, you can play it early game, it can get rid of a threat potentially. As the game goes on, it becomes not quite as good because your opponent can then get rid of their weakest creature. It might not be as strong, but it's still decent for 3 mana. Gilt Leaf Winnower, and this is going to be the top of your curve for that elf deck. So this is one of those cards, if you open pack 1, you're going to pick this and you're going to go all in on elves. You're going to get a lot of cheap little elves, and this card is going to become very good for you. So 4/3 for 5, that's decent. It has menace, which is even better. And then on top of that, when it comes into play, it acts as removal, at least for a non-elf creature, which again is going to be most of the time just fine for you. This is a great card. Again, if that elf deck does happen in standard, this will probably be a part of it. Gnarlroot Trapper. And here's another card that's going to help you ramp in that elf strategy. He's cheap. Now, you're going to pay a little life to get the mana out of him, but that's going to be well worth it early game when you're just trying to ramp into some more spells. And on top of that, you have the ability to give attacking elves Death Touch, which just makes blocking very, very difficult for your opponent, allows for extra damage to come across, especially in the early to mid game. This is going to be a great card in that elf deck, and again, if it does cross over into standard, there's a chance that this will be a part of it. As far as Commander goes too, there's a lot of nice cards that are going to complement the existing elf strategies. This could be one of them, so expect to see some of these cards cross over into Commander as well. Graveblade Marauder, and yeah, I'd pay 3 for a Death Toucher Unlimited anytime, even if it's a more defensive one. And if I'm playing that mill strategy, this card gets better fast. Now, it's still very easy to block, but your opponent's got a decision to make. Do they want to keep losing their creatures to a 1/4 Death Toucher, or do they want to find another way to deal with it? They're almost going to have to find a way to deal with it if you have even a few creatures in your graveyard. Very good limited card. Infernal Scarring. And here's a cheap aura, so this is going to go along with the Enchantment Matters theme. And I do like this aura a little bit. It gives a little boost to power, but not toughness. However, when the creature dies, you get to draw cards, so you don't feel like you're getting so much 2-for-1 with this one. So this is an okay aura. It's not going to work out in every deck, or you're not going to need it in every deck, but it gets much better with some enchantment synergies. This is one that probably wouldn't cross over into like Mono Black Devotion or anything like that. Next is Infinite Obliteration, and this card is nuts. This is off the hook. I can't wait to see what happens with this card. Now, granted, it costs 3, 2 of it's on color. It's a sorcery, but you name a creature card, and your opponent has to give up all the copies of that card in their hand, graveyard, and library, and exile those copies. And you get to look through their entire library and hand. Now, yes, the fact that it's a creature card, some people will say, well, you got cards like Extirpate or Surgical Extraction that can get rid of any type of spell. Yeah, sure, but cards like this in the past have always had to target the spell. So you either had to find a copy either in the graveyard, in the player's hand, or on the battlefield to make this sort of effect happen. This, you don't have to do that. You just simply say the name of a card, and guess what? They have to get rid of all the copies. So you can just play this on turn 3 and say, Siege Rhino, GG. You can play this on turn 3 against a combo deck and say, in Legacy, and say, Painter Servant, the end. Game's over. They can't deal with it if their combo piece is a creature, if they don't have a counter spell or some way to protect themselves. They can't deal with this. You run multiple copies of this and you just start tearing apart decks. They start losing their key components. And let's face it, in Standard as well as a lot of Modern, a lot of the decks are creature-based. So, taking out a Primeval Titan from the Amulet deck, taking out Siege Rhino from every deck in Standard, these are powerful effects. So, I don't know. This card to me just seems nuts, and it's going to really hinder creature strategies for the first time in a very long time, where Wizards has really pushed the power of creatures. This negates the power of a lot of creature decks. So I don't know. Maybe I'm overvaluing this, but I just think this is really going to change a lot of aspects in multiple formats. Now, not as good, obviously, in Commander if you're playing any sort of singleton format. And when it comes to Sealed, it's probably more of a sideboard card. Once you know what your opponent's playing, maybe you see what one of their big bomb threats is, and you just use it to destroy that without it even being on the battlefield. That's still good enough. Yeah, definitely good in Game 2 and Game 3 in that case. Maybe not Game 1. But yeah, this is going to be a powerhouse. Kothafed Soul Hoarder, and I like the flavor here. The art is the creature that's been on demonic tutor in recent years, and let's face it, it's a 6/6 flyer for 6. He's going to be amazing and limited. And as far as his ability goes, it's there. I mean, obviously, if you're low on life, it's going to be risky. If you have plenty of life, it's going to be great. But let's face it, if he's on the board and your opponent can't deal with him, your opponent's going to be dead in a couple turns anyway, so I don't know if his ability really means that much. It's just probably more important that he's a 6/6 flyer. It's going to be a good card for Commander as well. I don't know if I necessarily see him, maybe Mono Black Devotion, a 1-of at the high end of the curve or something like that, but don't know if I see him in Standard as much as Commander, and definitely Limited. Next is Languish, and everybody's wanted a Damnation reprint for a long time. Damnation just keeps going through the roof price-wise. So this is a nice little Damnation alternate version, and in some times it's not going to be as powerful as Damnation, but in other times it will be better than Damnation. Same casting cost, it's a sorcery, but instead of destroy all creatures, they can't regenerate. All creatures get -4/-4 until end of turn. In most cases, that's probably good enough. It gets rid of indestructible creatures, which is something Damnation can't do. And the drawback being, especially now in today's Standard, there's a lot of 5 toughness cards. I mean, you have Siege Rhino, obviously. You have some of the dragons from Dragons of Tarkir that you won't be able to really deal with this card alone. However, post-combat, you can still perhaps play this and get some of those creatures. But still, even having said that, it's probably not a great time in Standard for this card, which is going to keep its power in check a little bit. but it's still a very, very powerful effect. This is going to be a great alternative for people that want to fork out 60, 80 bucks for damnations. I think you'll see it get some modern play. It will definitely get some commander play. It's going to be a great board sweep for you in limited, so if you're behind, this is your panic button to kind of equalize the game and catch up. So overall, this is going to be a fantastic card. It's going to get a lot of play. It's going to be great. Next is Liliana, and she's maybe not one of the best planeswalkers in the set, but she's by far not the worst. I like her. I think she's maybe middle of the road out of the 5, but still a good creature. Costs 2 black and 1 colorless, so she's got 2 on color, but you get a 2/3 lifelinker. She's real easy to flip. You just have to have a non-token creature die, and then you also get a 2/2 black zombie token when she does flip, which is pretty cool. And once she flips, only 3 loyalty counters, so that's not super great, but you can pump her pretty quick with a +2 ability. Now, sometimes you're in a situation where you don't really want to discard a card, and then she can be sort of awkward, but for the most part, it's going to be okay to pump her up and to get your opponent to lose cards, and if you're discarding creatures, you can use the -X later to maybe bring them back. Now, the -X is a quasi way of defending her as well. Maybe not foolproof since it is a little conditional, but it is a defensive ability. And the -8 ultimate, it's a good designed ultimate. It doesn't make your opponent immediately scoop, but if you're playing a creature-intensive deck, and if they're playing a creature-intensive deck, this becomes very difficult for them to win, but not impossible. So I do like that design. Overall, very good card. This is going to be a limited bomb. You're going to definitely play this in limited all day, every day. Standard, there might be a place for her in a control deck that just wants to get the hand disruption out there. That hand disruption is good enough, and maybe you just work your win condition creature into the graveyard, and then you can keep bringing it back. She has some power, so it's very possible that you'll see her in Standard as well. Definitely a great card for Commander, especially creature-centric decks. Overall, I think this one does feel mythic to me, a little better than a couple of the other Planeswalkers that we've seen, so I do like her. Macabre Waltz. This is a good limited card advantage card, especially for that mill deck. So you mill some creatures into your graveyard, now you pay 2, and it's kind of like you're drawing 2 creatures. Real strong card in the right deck in limited. Not always going to make the cut. It's going to depend on the makeup of your deck, but it can be very good for you. Mellecker Callblade. So paying 2 for a 1/1 creature doesn't feel super good, but when your opponent loses creatures, he's going to get +1/+1 counters. That's good. I like these effects better when they are all creatures on the board, not just opponent's creatures. All creatures on the board cards can become very powerful and actually can get out of control quickly. When it's just one person's creatures, or opponent's creatures in this case, which is a lot better in Commander, don't get me wrong, it's not as exciting to me, especially if the card doesn't have evasion. So this card is probably not always going to make your cut in limited. It's maybe a weaker black creature, but if you need a creature that has some growth potential, he could be in there and squeak by as your 22nd, 23rd playable. Nantogo Husk. There's been times where this card's been very powerful in limited, and there's been times when it has been weak in limited. The fact that it doesn't have evasion is its biggest strike against it. It can pump very fast by sacking creatures if you have a lot of small creatures or some kind of token strategy going on. He can be crazy. He's a zombie, which does matter a little bit, at least in this set. But the fact that he doesn't have evasion can be pretty tough to get around at times. And if your opponent does have any way of dealing with him post sacking the creatures, you can find yourself in a bad place. So it is a little bit of a risky card as well. Some decks will play this again. Maybe it's going to be more of a 22, 23rd playable. In this limited environment, I don't think he's going to be super good. But, I mean, there's times where he can potentially win you the game. Necromantic Summons. I like these type of cards. So 5 mana, you get to take a creature out of any graveyard, put it in play, and hey, if you have Spell Mastery, it gets 2/+1/+1 counters. That's phenomenal. This, of course, gets much better in that mill strategy. If you can mill some huge bomb and then put it out there for 5 mana, this is even splashable, which is pretty neat. That's awesome. Or even if your opponent has something awesome in their graveyard, you can take it. Or if they got milled, you can maybe take advantage of that strategy. So this is fantastic. As far as a reanimation strategy goes in maybe standard, I don't know if it's out there. I mean, maybe as the next couple sets come out, there'll be something, but I just feel like that might be a little clunky, especially at 5 mana for this card to make work. It can be a fine card in Commander, but limited is probably going to be the home for this. Next is Night Snare. This is an interesting design to me. I've never really seen a card quite like this, I don't think. Costs 4, now it is sorcery speed, and you get to look at your opponent's hand, and then you choose a non-land card from it, and they're forced to discard it. Or you just say, okay, thanks for letting me see your hand, now discard 2 cards of your choice. I like the flexibility of that, the fact that you can either get rid of 1 card that's going to be really problematic, or you can just make them get rid of 2 cards and kind of mind rot them and see their hand is kind of cool. 4 casting cost, though, feels a little high to me for this type of effect, so it's not going to replace cards like Thoughtseize or anything like that when you get into like modern environment or currently standard environment, but it's going to be okay in limited, I think, in certain conditions. Other than that, don't know if it's going to see that much play, but I do like the design of it. I think it's interesting. Priest of the Bloodright. Now, here's a very good limited card. Costs 5 to get a 5/5 demon, and on top of that, you get this 2/2 guy that, yeah, he does 2 damage to you every turn, but he's also a 2/2 creature, so you can use that to your advantage and just keep attacking in with him. Your opponent's going to have to decide at some point whether to take 2 damage along with you, or kind of succumb to the pressure and block this guy and maybe kill him, and then the 2 damage is off your back too. But just the fact that he's putting a 5/5 flyer into play for 5 is pretty awesome. And if you can like bounce him or flicker him or something like that, then you can get even more 5/5 flyers. This is going to be an awesome commander card. I think you're going to see some crazy things with this type of card in commander. He's a limited bomb. As far as standard goes, I don't know if there's space for him for in mono black devotion. Maybe not. So I don't know if he's going to see standard play, but he's strong enough to be right on the cusp. It's possible. He could make it in the right deck. Rabid bloodsucker. He costs 5 for a 3/2 flyer. That's not super economical, but it's more than playable in limited. You'll be happy to have a card like this with the evasion. It also does 2 damage to all the players, so you get an extra bonus 2 damage out of your opponent on top of it, and then hopefully you'll be able to get in there for 3 every turn with this guy. Yeah, these cards are always a little bit of a risk if you're behind in the game, but I think it's worth the risk in limited. Next is Read the Bones, and this has seen some standard play in the past. It could certainly see standard play again now that it's been reprinted. Great card for you in limited. Now, it's a sorcery instead of an instant, which is a little clunkier, but for 3 mana, you can scry 2, which is a very powerful effect, and then you get to draw the 2 cards, and then you kind of take your 2 life like Sign and Blood. But very good card. It's going to help you dig through your deck, get some good card selection, and draw. Reeve Soul. This is a very powerful removal spell. It only costs 2, and it can get rid of probably most creatures. Now, yeah, it can't get rid of your most problematic ones, but early game, you're going to get rid of those threats that are 2-3 power toughness that could really hurt you early before you kind of get your momentum going and get your plan in place. So these are fantastic cards. Good enough to see standard play for sure, and it's going to be great for you in limited. Also want to point out, it's at the common slot, so you'll see a lot of these floating around, especially in drafts. Return Centaur, and here's one of the cards that's going to help you with that kind of mill yourself strategy. So he's a 2/4 for 4, which is a decent defensive blocking creature. He's a zombie, which sometimes will matter for you as well. But his sole purpose really is to get some cards in your graveyard to work with some of the other synergies we've already seen. Next is Revenant, and this is a really fine card. It costs 5 for a flyer. And if you're using that mill strategy in limited, he's going to be even better for you. So this guy can potentially be a limited bomb. I like the fact that he's at the uncommon slot. You'll see at least a good amount of him around in drafts and in limited. The one thing that makes me sad about this card is they changed the flavor text. The old version used to say "not again," and the quote was from Hans, which was a joke from the Lightwave card. So I know that's going back a little ways, but if you're not familiar with it, check it out. But yeah, other than the flavor text, it's going to be a good limited card. Shadows of the Past. So this is a cheap enchantment. It's going to go really well in that Enchantment Matters theme. And when a creature dies, scrying 1 is pretty powerful. I mean, that's going to do very well for you in limited. It's also a late game mana sink to help you gain life and get some direct damage across to your opponents, which is pretty cool. Now, it is a little conditional, and again, this is going to be better probably in that mill strategy deck than where you mill yourself than a normal deck. But still, this is relatively decent for an enchantment. I like the fact that it's aggressively costed. I think it could also see some commander play as well. Chamblee Ghoul, and this guy's a little slow. I mean, he's a zombie, so he comes into play tapped. But paying 2 for 2/3, even if you do have to wait a turn to start getting the benefit of him, still pretty aggressive. I mean, turn 3, 2/3 is not a horrible thing. So he's going to fit well into some of your limited black decks. Tainted Remedy, and here's another enchantment. This one's kind of a life gain hoser, and I don't know, there's not a lot of life gain in the set. We saw a little bit of it in the white review, so from a limited point of view, I don't think this card's going to be very helpful to you. However, this is going to be really cool in Commander. This is going to be a good sideboard card to Modern. It certainly would hose Soul Sisters decks and stuff like that. So I think this is a fine sideboard card that's going to show up whenever decks like Soul Sisters kind of rise to prominence. So pretty good card to have in the environment. Thermo Archer, and this is just another one of those kind of elf-themed decks. He's a 1-drop for a 1/2, so that's decent. And I like 2/1s better, but you don't really see that in black. That's usually more of a white thing. But when he does attack, each opponent who doesn't control an elf loses life, so it is kind of like having a 2/2 early game. Decent card in an aggro strategy or in the elf strategy. You don't necessarily want to keep drawing these into the mid to late game. They're going to become much worse as the game goes on. But having a 1-of or something in an elf synergy deck in limited probably won't be too bad. Next is Tormented Thoughts, and this is kind of a fixed Mind Twist, I guess. The art is very, very reminiscent of Mind Twist, and this is still seems very powerful to me. I mean, paying 3, granted I have to sack a creature, but I can probably get a creature with at least power 3 on the board on turn 3. Maybe this is more of a turn 4 play, and I kind of strip most of my opponent's hand. That's pretty decent. This is going to be a great card for you in limited. I think this will definitely see standard play. There's even potential for this to see some modern play in the right deck. Definitely you'll see this in Commander. This is going to be a really good card. This is another one to really watch. Find it interesting that's only at the uncommon slot. This really feels rare to me. But yeah, I guess we'll see. Maybe they've play tested it and it's not as strong as it looks, but just feels like this could be really powerful. Touch of the Moonglove, and this is just a quick little combat trick instant, but I like these instances that give creatures Death Touch because they kind of almost work like removal under the right circumstances, and on top of that, does a little damage as an extra bonus as well. So yeah, nice little combat trick. You might play a couple of these in your limited deck. This is Undead Servant, and this guy's a little awkward. 3/2 for 4 is not super good, but if you have other copies of him in the graveyard, he becomes very good very quickly. So again, he's going to be better if you can mill yourself. If you can mill yourself and you've drafted a lot of copies of these, then he's a good card. But that's the only time he's probably going to be a good card. So he's very situational. But in a draft, if you end up with maybe 3-4 copies of this and a mill strategy, okay, that's probably when you're going to play him. Other than that, you might not get a lot of play out of this guy, unfortunately. Unholy Hunker, and here is another destroy target creature removal spell, which is kind of nice. Now again, it costs 5. This one's 2 black, so it's a little harder to splash as well. But you know, you gain a little life with spell mastery. Really doesn't matter. Really, you're just looking at the fact that it's instant destroy target creature, and that's what makes this card fantastic for limited. Last card of the day is Weight of the Underworld, and this is another black removal spell. It's going to do some work for you in limited, and on top of that, it's also an enchantment, so it works in that enchantment matter strategy. Really good card for both the fact that it can take out a creature or at least significantly weaken a creature. You're going to play this all day long in limited. It's going to do work for you. Having said that, we got through all of the black cards, so we're halfway there. We got 3 more chapters to go. Tomorrow we'll look at all the red cards, and then the following day green, and then on Wednesday we'll wrap up with the rest of the set. So hey, as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. If you're still looking for quality Magic the Gathering videos, click on one of these annotations. And if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the breaking MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, crazy product openings, or gameplay videos on Heroes and Legends MTG. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.